Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by AdeQuest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with Sedat Kapanoglu, who is the CEO and co-founder of Eksi, one of the original social media platforms in Turkey, and is now a West Coast-based programmer, developer, and still very much involved with Eksi. He's also the author of the book Street Coder, Rules to Break and How to Break Them. Sedat's going to be talking about or telling us, when coders should follow the normal standards and best practices and the rules that they've been taught, and when they should break those rules and look for shortcuts or better ways to get the job done. Hey, Sedat, how are you today?
Good, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Whereabouts are you located?
I'm in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the same time zone. I'm about 800 miles up the coast in the Seattle, Bellevue, Redmond area.
Okay. I lived in Seattle for 5 years, actually.
Oh, yeah? Were you working for, let me guess, Microsoft?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, like most of the engineers there.
Yeah, well, these days it's Microsoft or Amazon, and then it's amazing because I grew up in this area, and back when I was growing up, it was a one-shop town, and it was all about Boeing, and literally our economic fortunes would rise and fall based upon how Boeing was doing. And fortunately, that's not the case because Boeing's been having a really tough time this last couple of years. Microsoft came in and really changed the whole region because, of course, it's business, but then all of the startups from people who left Microsoft and started selling services back into Microsoft, and then you had Amazon start here and Expedia and T-Mobile and Starbucks, and so it's really well diversified. Probably not as diversified as the Bay Area, of course, but and you have better weather down there. Where did you actually prefer living?
I don't know. I think San Francisco is an outlier in California in terms of climate. It's always foggy and windy down here. So it resembles Seattle's weather a lot, actually, except the rain.
Yeah.
We don't get as much rain here.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think it's pretty okay.
Yeah, and well, one thing with the Bay Area is you can hop across the bay over in like Pleasanton area or Sacramento or whatever, and instantly get another 10 degrees warmer, which here we don't we don't have that option.
That's true.
But
That's true.
Hey, so we didn't set this up to talk about the climate, though. People love to talk about the weather, but we want to talk a little bit about your book, which is called Street Coder. Rules to Break and How to Break Them. And I'm super intrigued because I love breaking rules. And I got a bit of a outlaw mindset, whether it's in business or in life or in whatever. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, just give us an overview of your book and also explain, why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah. So the book actually touches the subject of having a professional career and filling out the gaps between your career and what you learned. I'm a self-taught programmer, so I had to learn everything by myself. And because of that, I had to learn a lot of unnecessary stuff while doing that. And after I started working at a company, I noticed that some of the things I learned didn't make any sense, but some of the things actually made a lot more sense than I could guess. And I think that's a problem with all the programmers nowadays. They Either they are from a university education or a boot camp or any kind of training or just self-taught. They have some gap between what they learn and what they encounter in their professional career, which I call streets in the book. And I'm trying to fill this gap by telling them about what makes sense in a professional setting, like, for example, algorithms, data structures. Those kinds of subjects might feel like boring during your university education, but after you start working at on an actual project, you start to notice that some of those topics can actually be useful and make your life less miserable, because you can figure out that some of the topics can actually help you write code faster, or help you write a code that you don't need to touch again, because maintenance is also a burden. And I'm trying to tell the readers about how to avoid future maintenance work by writing correct code in the first place, and that lets you avoid the whole maintenance burden later in the process. So about breaking rules, the thing is, when we learn about something, when we are a beginner or a medium level programmer, every kind of paradigm looks like immutable law to us. And I'd like to address that problem by saying, like, provocative suggestions like don't write code comments, use goto. I mean, these are in programming world, software development world, these are like, if someone hears you say that, they might say, what are you talking about? What do you mean don't write code comments? Or
well, no, that's interesting,
mean?
because I've just taken a few coding courses, and I'm probably the least technical person on the whole west coast of America. But but I know that seems to be one of the cardinal rules, that when you're writing code, you always write comments. And again,
Yes.
I'm not self-taught. I actually took courses. So I'm not gonna tell the professor, what are you talking about? Why would I write? But explain that. Why wouldn't you write comments?
Yeah. So, for example, code comments. In the book, I'm actually talking about how to write comments the right way. The problem is, if you write comments for everything, every piece of code, you pollute the code with irrelevant information. For example, you add 2 to 2 and assign it to a variable in the code, and you say in the comments, we're adding 2 to 2 here. So I'm actually telling there to use comments in a more beneficial way. You write comments only when it matters. That's what I'm telling you in the book. But first, I have to, evoke the idea that you don't have to write all the comments that comes to your mind. You just need to write comments only where it matters, so it can make a difference. Otherwise, whoever reads your code starts ignoring your comments. And if you have something important to say in the comments, it gets lost in all the other comments that didn't matter at all. So, I mean, in the book, I say don't write code comments, but in the actual text, I'm explaining how to write code comments the right way. So that's the book's tone in general, like with everything. I mean, I say use goto. Goto is like a forbidden statement in programming world. If anyone sees you use goto, they would shoot you in the head, because
you coders are pretty severe, man. That's
they are, unfortunately. I mean, code reviews can get brutal. So that's one of the earliest paradigms, settled down in the programming world. Goto is considered harmful. That was an article written by Etzker Dijkstra, and he's one of the most renowned scientists in programming world. And So that's why everybody follows this. But there are cases where go-to can be beneficial more than any other alternative. So in that section, I'm explaining those differences. So all the breaking rules and or not breaking them is about having a sane understanding of existing paradigms and using them only when relevant and not using them when they don't make sense. I'm trying to emphasize this throughout the book on
So,
every topic.
so it's kind of like it's not about the rules; it's about the principle. And if you follow a certain principle, which is, for example, what is the most efficient versus what does the rules say, or what is the most secure or the appropriate security level, you follow that regardless of some predefined rule.
Yes, exactly.
Let,
And
let me let me ask you. Sorry to cut you off there, but let me ask you: why do you think that there is a disconnect between what is taught in universities and what is actually useful out in the "quote unquote" real world? Why is there that disconnect? I mean, in an ideal world, you would have this immediate feedback loop, right?
yeah.
But why the disconnect?
Because curriculum doesn't change as fast as the actual programming sector. Uh, so the requirements of a job can evolve really quickly in a professional setting. Like a framework can get obsolete in 5 years, but the curriculum stays the same over decades. So you and it makes sense too. I mean, it doesn't make sense to change curriculum every other year, but
Well, but
but
here's the thing. I mean, computer science programs are probably the most competitive or one of the most competitive programs in American universities to get into right now, especially, your top tier universities. Like University of Washington here, it's like, 10% of the applicants get into the program. It's incredibly brutal and they spend a lot of time and money to get into these programs. Of course, they all have jobs waiting for them out there, and it's almost kind of like it's almost that like the university doesn't really need to update their curriculum and be competitive, because if they were in private business, if they were in private industry, they would have to be competitive. But because they kind of almost have a monopoly, I mean, there's a limited number of seats, there's a limited number of programs. It seems to be that there can be that lag. Now, you explain to me why you think that it's okay to have that lag, or what they could do. I mean, what's your observation there?
So, there's obviously a lag, and that's what I'm trying to address in the book too, because, the computer science education is solid. They teach you all the basics and everything relevant that can stay relevant for decades. But the thing is, if when you started a job, you quickly get up to speed. Like in a couple of years, you probably learn some of the stuff, how they are relevant to actual software development work, and how some of the stuff isn't. But you need to spend some time in order to do that. I'm trying to, close that gap faster than an actual professional experience can do. So if you read the book, you can find out how algorithms will help you in your professional software development career. Then you can discover it by yourself over the years. So it's like an accelerant in that sense, that can provide an insight on professional software development world, um, uh, without actually having to experience it in the first place.
Well, that sounds like a very worthwhile investment, especially for anybody that's dropped, whatever it is, however many thousands and thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars to get a computer science education. It's well worth it to invest in your book if it can help them to cut some corners and accelerate their career.
Yeah, it is still a single book. I mean, it's impossible to cover every topic, but what I'm trying to focus on is to provide a perspective change to new developers, so they can be inquisitive about whatever they learn, be it at college or be it at a course. So
So it's kind of like giving people a new or a an alternative mindset or framework to look at problems, and instead of just what they've been fed from the university.
exactly, yeah.
Let's talk about some of the specifics. I know in your book, you mentioned anti-patterns and bad programming practices, and they can actually, sometimes the anti-patterns and bad practices can actually be put to good use. I mean, I think the example of comments or code comments is one example, or not using them, I should say. Is there some other is there some other examples of anti-patterns and bad programming practices?
Yeah, there are. I mean, like for example, there is don't use inheritance in object-oriented programming. Inheritance is actually the backbone of object-oriented programming. It was considered as the biggest accomplishment of it back in times. Now it's actually considered like it is pretty much like tying your shoelaces together, because when you use inheritance, you create dependencies, and those dependencies may not be necessary to exist, and that kind of dependency can actually hurt your flexibility in changing code. So instead of inheritance, I suggest using composition. Instead of inheriting a class from another, I say use an abstract interface, and if you have any common code, separate it from your class hierarchy and put it in another class. So I tell about it in the examples. And also, there are other anti-patterns, like I say, do repeat yourself. So there is this well-known advice in programming world. It's short and dry. Don't repeat yourself. So it's actually a principle that recommends reusing code as much as possible. So that in the point is have as little as code possible. So you write less code, and that means you spend less time writing programs. But the thing is, when you try reusing code aggressively, you can again create unnecessary dependencies, and actually dependencies over boundaries of context. And let's say your file class can depend on your window class because UI class for the reason of simply reusing the code. So I'm telling in the book that such aggressive approach to reuse can be harmful and actually can make you a slower developer than you can be. So I'm telling in the book that you can just copy paste the code when it makes sense. And that's the book is about, basically. I'm usually repeating that in the book, like only do that when it makes sense, only do that when it doesn't. And so that's the general pattern throughout the book.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I liked about the book is you also offer some maybe higher level strategic advice. For example, you talk about how to succeed on a dysfunctional team or with a paranoid manager. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that relates to everybody. I mean, you could be a coder, you could be whatever you are, right? And if you've got to deal with a dysfunctional team, or especially a paranoid manager, but I want to hear some examples of a paranoid manager too. So please talk a little bit about that.
So that was one of the topics in the security chapter. And the thing is, while we design security, we developers only think in terms of vulnerabilities, software updates, open ports, like technical things, but security is more than that. And one of the examples I give out is that a controlling manager might want to have access to every resource in the company, and because of that, they might have unnecessarily broad access to every resource. And when you have perfect security designed and your manager has that access, then you don't have a secure design in the first place. It doesn't matter how much you invest in security. Just sending an email to your manager can actually let a hacker to breach your security. And I'm trying to tell about some of the ways to avoid this kind of hierarchy in the book. And in other ways, I think all the advice in the book can help in those settings. Like when you're in a code review and your manager reads about something in a magazine or in a book, like a rule, if they ask you, why didn't you write comments here? Because you should write comments. I mean, because dysfunctional managers can be very dogmatic. They don't know the subject. They may not know the subject very well, but if they hear about something, they try to enforce it on their employees.
Well, I would, if I had a manager asking me about writing code comments, I would just say, hey man, here's the book called Street Coder. You got to read this, man. That's what I would do.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. So, that's the thing basically. I mean, if you become inquisitive about the practices you follow, you can counter argue about the points your manager brings, and that's what I want to impose to readers in general. I mean, become inquisitive about any rule, any dogma, so you can argue about them in a logical way, rather than hey, everybody does this, why don't we do this? Instead of that, you can just say, we do this because it helps us in this way. And I'm trying to push this agenda in the book, basically.
No, that's excellent. Let's stay on the topic of security for a while, because this is the Secure Talk podcast, so that makes sense, I guess. Maybe you can give us some of your thoughts on the key points or key best practices for writing secure code.
Yeah. So security is a very broad subject, and writing secure code, that's something we haven't resolved yet. I mean, it's only marginally possible to verify if a code is secure or not in a methodical way. Normally, you don't have that ability because of how Turing machines work. Because of the halting problem, we haven't yet found a way to verify if a software works correctly or not. We can do it in very strict settings, like using narrowly defined programming languages. But other than that, in general software development, we don't have a way to say that this code is secure. So it is still a mystical art to write secure code. But there are things that every developer should know from the get-go. Like, as I said before, knowing the risks, ability to prioritize them. And there are very basic stuff that you need to know if you're writing remotely accessible code. For example, I'm one of the shareholders, but I'm also the founder of one of the oldest social media websites in Turkey called Eksi. And so I had been CEO of the company for a while. And during that time, I noticed that the developers we hired might some of them weren't knowledgeable enough on these topics. And that's why I think it's a good idea to remind them, because nowadays we still see websites get hacked because they have a SQL injection vulnerability, or they have XSS vulnerability, cross-site scripting vulnerability, or CSRF vulnerability. Those are very basic things. I mean, that's not even the scratching the surface of security. But I think they are valuable to know, and how to know that to address them. And
well, if you're involved in a project, a development project, do you have a security checklist? I mean, you just mentioned a couple different vulnerabilities right there. And sometimes teams will go through ad hoc and say, "Oh, have we checked for this? Have we checked for that?" Sometimes there's one individual or a small group of individuals that are responsible for security. Sometimes it's a broad team effort. Sometimes it's organized. Sometimes not. What have you seen that works best in terms of making sure that the final product, the final platform, is secure across most known common vulnerabilities?
Yeah. During my time as a CEO at the company, I think the greatest thing that helped was code reviews. So code reviews was critical in order to get a good idea about how the code gets shaped, because I think that code reviews are a way to they are like an initiation ritual for a new code to be accepted by others, and after code review it becomes everybody else's code. That's my perception. And if you don't say anything in the code review, then you can't say anything about that code in the future. In terms of, you can't blame the developer anymore. I mean, obviously you can find errors in it, bugs in it, or change it, but you don't have a right to complain about it anymore. That's how I see code reviews, and I think they help a lot. But you're right, you need someone who is knowledgeable on security issues in the code review team, so they can provide insight about best practices. If that person doesn't use parameterized queries in their code, you tell them to change the code. But you have to make it a part of the process. Otherwise, it's really easy for them to get away, because it's easier to write unsafe code. It's usually the easier way. So developers are like, lightning. They find the path of least resistance. So if something is easier to do, they'll do it that way. And I'm trying to tell in the book that actually the harder way doesn't have to be very hard. There is only marginal difference between writing secure way and the unsafe way. So I'm trying to convince the reader that, hey, if you can do this, you can do it with very little changes, very little improvements, and you can still have secure code in the sense of, avoiding those vulnerabilities.
That's some excellent advice. Hey, let me ask you this. What advice would you give, and this doesn't have to be related to security, whatever, more on professional development and career development, somebody who's considering to be a developer, a coder, or somebody who's, they just graduated and they're in their first job and they really want to move up the career ladder? Or, maybe that's not even the end goal. Maybe it's they just want to be the best programmer possible. What advice would you give?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think Steve Jobs' quote in his commencement speech at Harvard, I guess, he said, "Stay hungry and stay foolish," and I think it resonates in as professional software career. when we start our software career and looking for a job, we try to find the best job there is, and we try to find. We have ambitious career aspirations, but I think a mediocre job or less paying job can also be beneficial in terms of shaping your experience, expectations from a company. So instead of wasting time looking for the best job over a year, I'd say use that year to work at a worse job and use the experience to prepare yourself for the better job. So yeah, that would be my I guess biggest advice, because I found that in my I've been developing software for 25 years professionally, and when I look back to my early years, I see that I benefited a lot from my experience at terrible companies, terrible process management, terrible management in general, but I learned a lot from them. And I think
you know
even
what?
yeah,
As long as you're learning, I really don't think there are quote good and bad experiences. I think that any time that you learn and you can just reflect on, okay, what's the teachable lesson here? What's the learnable lesson? If that can become part of your day-to-day kind of thought process, it's all good, and then
yes.
because there's no such thing as good if you can't, because it's good is relative, right? So if everything is at the same A level 100%, well then it's all the same and it's not good, it's just average at that point, right? And so you need to understand, you need to have that contrast, but you also, in order to take advantage of that contrast, you need to have that mindset that you're talking about.
Yes, and if I would add anything to that, that would be surround yourself with better people than you, and that can be at a bad company or good company. It doesn't matter, but have people that are much better than you around, and they can change your perspective. They can extend your horizon. That can help you in many ways. I think that helped me a lot in my professional software career. Great people. I mean, when I first joined Microsoft, before I started my job there, before my first day at work, I thought, hey, I got accepted to Microsoft. I must be a great programmer. I must be an excellent software developer. That's what I thought. And I started there, and I saw the people working there, and I said, hey, all these people are much better than me. They are excellent. They are like geniuses compared to me. And that actually made me much more excited about my career there, because I had so much to learn from them. And they helped me a lot in that sense. I felt like a Padawan in a Jedi Academy. So yeah, that was great. And then I noticed that was a pattern in my career. Whenever I worked somewhere, I found someone that are much more experienced or much more knowledgeable than me, and I learned a lot from them. And that's critical to accelerate your learning process. And I think it helps much more than any other thing, because when you see someone doing something in actual reality, that changes everything. You see that person typing code in front of the screen, and you see how they do something. There are very subtle hints in making your task much more, accomplishing your task much more effectively. And yeah, and they also have a lot of wisdom in them too, and you can benefit from it too. So yeah, basically, don't be afraid of working at a bad job, and surround yourself with great people. Those two go hand in hand.
Some excellent advice. And I'm not sure who said it. It might have been Ben Franklin, but somebody once said, you are the average of your 5 closest friends. And I kind of think that way professionally as well. If you surround yourself with people who are all above you, it's going to pull you up. And the opposite is true as well, right? I mean, if you're in a job and you are the rock star and nobody's even close to you, well, how do you learn? It might feel good to always be right and kind of leading every project, but you're not developing, you're not growing. So
that's very true. There is another quote similar to that one that says, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
I like that. I like that. Hey, so you're originally from Turkey, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know that so I'm going to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but just bear with me, okay? The Turks and the Greeks, historically, I'm talking, thousands of years ago, historically, have had some serious issues. But I'm curious. Do you, as part of your education, or or afterwards, have you ever read any Plato?
Only brief excerpts, not whole works.
Okay.
Basically.
Well, I'm going to read to you one paragraph from a Platonic dialogue called Meno. And Platonic dialogues typically, involve, he's writing about his teacher Socrates, and there's typically a question that's asked, and then throughout the rest of the dialogue, hopefully they resolve or answer the question. I'm going to kind of modify this a little bit, and you're going to be in the role of Socrates, but we're going to change Socrates' name to Sedat, and I'm going to read this to you. And then I want you to answer as Sedat or as Socrates, okay? So listen to this.
Sure.
Can you tell me, Sedat, can coding be taught, or is it not teachable but the result of practice? Or is it neither of these, but people possess it by nature or in some other way?
That's a great question, Plato. So
actually, in that time, I'm Meno. I'm an aspiring coder who's going to the most famous coder or philosopher in all of Greece.
Okay. So I think we have an innate ability to understand coding or software development or programming. I mean, we can run a microwave, we can run a dishwasher. All those are actually programming tasks. Very simple, but still we're making a device do something. And that's in our nature. We command something and make them do something. I mean, so in that sense, yes, programming is part of human nature. It's not mutually exclusive that it can be taught. It can still be taught, and but I think actually, in my experience, I started programming after I saw my brother write a program on an 8-bit computer, and I was astonished because he wrote some lines and the code drew a sinus line on the screen, and my brain got blown. And how could you do that? Like, you typed something there and something appeared on the screen, and I was amazed. And that actually what drove me to learn programming. And I think, yes, there is something that makes us excited about development, because we can control something, command something, and create an experience using it. Make other people experience something we created. I think that's part of human nature. And the more you learn about it, you get better at it. And practice, the more you practice, you get better at it. They all are in the same box. They are not at all mutually exclusive.
No, and you know what? I think what you're saying is that, you can't just sit down in a class and passively receive information and be out a coder. You have to be motivated and kind of self-directed. That has to be part of the equation. And some of the best coders and developers that I've ever worked with were all self-taught, but they're constantly hungry, and it's just they had this passion to wanting to learn and challenge the quote unquote normal rules to the game, and in asking why not this way, why not that way. And a lot of times when you ask why, you get your question gets shot down, or when your proposed solution gets shot down. But the great ones don't care. They're just like, well, okay, fine. I just want to know, why are we doing this? And by understanding why, that actually it goes back to that principle. Because if you understand the why, you understand the principle, and then later you can adopt the principle. But the personal motivation is awesome. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time here. Any last thoughts or comments or advice that you would give to aspiring coders or people who are already out there in the game?
The most common question I get asked is, which programming language should I pick to start programming? And I usually answer that with, just pick the one that looks easiest to you, because the programming knowledge is mostly easily transferable between different programming languages. They only differ in syntax, sometimes paradigms too, but mostly in syntax. And I think they just should pick whichever is the easiest. Like, for example, Python. Python is very straightforward. It has a simple syntax. It is slow, but it can get the job done for certain tasks. So if Python looks easy to you, start with Python. And then maybe you figure out that you need a web application and you need to write front end, then you can switch to JavaScript later. Or you need to write performance code, you can switch to C#, Java, or C. But start with the easiest one, and the rest will come. And you don't have to learn everything from scratch when you learn a new language. Excellent. That would be my final answer.
No, that's great. And every time I read a book or talk to somebody, my goal is to learn at least one thing. And in today's conversation, I've learned several things. I think it's been very, very helpful. So I really appreciate your time. And I'll be putting a link to your book or the publisher's page where our listeners can download a copy of your book if they like. And I'll be putting, I don't know, do you have any social channels that you would want me to link to, or do you want to mention here?
Sure, I do have a Twitter account. Actually, my book has a separate Twitter account too. You can share both if you want.
Excellent. I'll do that in the description. And again,
awesome.
I really appreciate talking to you, and hopefully we can cross paths one day soon.
Thank you, Mark. This was great.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.